In a world that's searching for truth and light, we gather stories to share inside. Authors with wisdom, their voices ring. In the exchange show, we bring hope and guidance. Welcome to the exchange, where stories unfold. Faith and inspiration are treasures to behold. Through words and wisdom, our spirits grow. Join us on this journey on the exchange show.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Exchange Show, where stories unfold. So thank you for joining us today. I am your host, Berthanna Oxendine, and I thank God we are here together today on the Exchange Show. So listen, like and share, and invite someone to watch with you right here on Facebook or on YouTube. And all the links you would need to become a part of our networking community, they will be listed in the description of this video. So here at the Exchange Show, I have the awesome privilege of talking to some of God's gifted authors and hearing their story. They may have a message of hope, faith, love, and guidance, but in different situations. So please support the authors by purchasing a copy of their book and then sharing the show information on all of your social media platforms. And I do believe if each one helps one, then we all will be successful. So a little about me. I am Berthanna Oxendine. I'm a certified life coach. I am an encourager, a pastor, a mother, and an international best-selling author. So without any further ado, let's introduce our special guest today. And our special guest is Mr. Matthew Lowe. How are you doing today, sir?
Good morning. I'm good.
Mr. Matthew, tell us, we're going to start off with you telling us a little bit about you.
Okay. So I work as a psychotherapist in private practice outside of Baltimore. I've been in the field for about 10 or so years. My population tends to be adults. My specialty, I guess, would be like existential issues.
Okay.
People who I used to work at a college for about 5 years. So that was sort of a lot of people's first existential crises are happening then. I talk with people a lot about things like meaning and relationships and trying to create like a narrative of self and of life for them to be able to better understand themselves and pursue their goals.
All right. That sounds great. Well, you have taken the time and wrote a book.
Mm-hmm.
And the title of that book is Seeing the Forest and the Trees.
Yes.
Seeing the Forest and the Trees. What inspired you to write this book?
So before becoming a therapist, I was an educator for a lot of years, teaching health, teaching theology, teaching philosophy. And I bring a lot of that same pedagogical approach to being a therapist. So there's a lot of things that I'm often telling, in the same week, I might say the same thing to a few different clients because it's relevant. And I realized that, I had been repeating myself a lot and I had enough that I just, I got tired of saying it. I wanted to write it down. I wanted to be able to share it so I could say, here, I have something on this, here it is. So I started writing these essays just to share with clients. And I sort of got on a roll and I just kept writing. And in the course of a year, I ended up, I wasn't trying to write a book. I just kept going and I ended up with about 50 essays. I was saying, you know what? I think this is a book.
Yes,
so,
most definitely.
So that's how this came to be. And I've been really enjoying sharing it with them. Occasionally I can tell one of them they inspired a chapter, which I think they appreciate.
That is great.
Yeah.
Well, what made you name this one? Seeing the Trees and the Forest. Why'd you get that title?
So I have to always share
Forest and the Trees.
Right. So the original title was "You Don't Get to Be Simple," which my editor told me was rather antagonistic, and if people don't know me, they might not like it, which is fair. So he and I were discussing, what really is what's my focus? What do I care about? And to me, what I really want clients to do is think very big and very small. right? So the forest are going to be these areas of life, things like limitations, time, emotions, right? These really large terms that we want to put a capital letter in front of, power, right? Words like that are, what's the word I want to use? Like they're just these major themes. So I want people to recognize these major themes and then be able to zoom in as much as possible. So for example, I can talk about sharing power in a relationship, and that's sort of the forest level. The tree level is, how do we exactly speak to one another? I was working on something about this recently, the difference between telling somebody that doesn't make sense versus I don't get it.
Okay.
Those feel really different to be told. And that's the tree level. Let's get into the minutia of when we're talking to each other. What are we saying and how does it make the other person feel?
Wow. Okay. And I noticed in your book, you talk about the zooming in and the zooming out, and all in your book as well. But did something happen to inspire something personal, experience that you had that caused you to write what you've written?
So like I said, this was sort of a second career for me. Before becoming a therapist, I went to seminary for undergraduate, and I went to divinity school for graduate school. This was all before realizing I wanted to be a therapist. Okay. And really what was driving me towards those fields was just these really large questions about life. I take those questions very seriously. And also just very playfully. I just love thinking about this kind of stuff. And so I'm trying to bring that same mentality to my clients, right? Let's look at life on the largest scale possible. Let's understand ourselves in terms of these really overarching themes. And so that's really what inspired this, just wanting people to be able to think both broadly and deeply about themselves.
Wow. So you cause a person to look within.
Say it again?
You're causing a person to look within themselves.
I'm hoping to. I mean, they show up wanting to. And then what I start doing is I almost think of myself as like a docent at a museum, right? Okay. Where I'm walking in their mind with them, or I'm pointing things out.
Oh, wow. That's good. I noticed something too. One of the chapters I was reading at the beginning, where it was talking about how your words shape your reality.
Yes, absolutely. I have a lot of I don't know what you want to call it, sort of nitpicking about language. So for example, therapists tend to love to use the word acceptance. I find that word not as helpful. I think the word accept has so many meanings that when we say, oh, you just have to accept the situation, we're not actually being clear with what we mean. Similarly, I don't find the word confidence very helpful. I think when people are focused on confidence, they're sort of overly focused on themselves, right? What I want people to be focused on instead is passion, right? If I'm excited about something, if I'm passionate about something, people are going to think of me as confident, but that's not where my head is at. I'm just busy doing the thing. So I've talked with a lot of students, a lot of business leaders, who wonder about this. They say, how do I bring more confidence into my life? And I say, let's scrap that word. Let's talk about how you can tap into passion and have that be what you show up with. Okay,
that's good. I know one thing you mentioned about how sometimes people are overthinker, and sometimes I have to say myself, I find myself being an overthinker.
Yeah.
And I said, oh my goodness. So just the different chapters and things I was going through in your book and reading, them, how you somewhat mapping through, and you had a statement there, and it says mapping your inner world for greater clarity and satisfaction, bringing satisfaction to your life. Let's talk a little bit about that mapping.
Sure. So one way this shows up, and I'll talk about it in the section on language, is I have a very long chapter about metaphors. I love metaphors. Again, they started with me back in my seminary days. that when we have something that's too abstract to really grasp, we need to use metaphorical language. And what's nice with that is now we have this sort of play realm that we can map onto the real one. Think of which, hold on, which example do I want to give here? Actually, you know what? I'll talk about, so I have this extended parable called The Walled and Welcoming City, in which I talk about, exactly that, this city that somehow both has a wall and welcomes people in, and how it's not sort of defensive, because if somebody gets in, the people ask, how did this thing get in? Right? If it's threatening us, does it have something to offer? And the whole thing is really an extended metaphor for what it means to be a vulnerable person while also having a type of self-security about that. Right. So through this story, and it's sort of a silly parable, it's not terribly dramatic, but through it, we're mapping out different parts of self. Okay, here are my strengths, here are my weaknesses, but also here's what I do, here's how I feel when somebody points those weaknesses out. Right? How do I have weaknesses? How do I have vulnerability in a way where I'm not going to get reactive and defensive?
Oh, wow. I know, Sue, in reading your book, you mentioned how, and it's like a guide, a self-help guide, and how you could look at, you have your book where it's in order, you can read chapter by chapter, but then you had how you could read, go through and pick out the one that you needing right then.
Yep.
Why did you decide to write it like that?
I think there's a temptation to write a book that is an entire philosophy. Right? I think people often are trying to write, right, here is the guide to all things. I find that a little overwhelming. And also it's a little, I think, confining for the clients, right? If I'm going to say, read this whole book and adopt all of its principles, I've got the answer to all your questions. That seems like a really large promise. I think what I'd rather do is say, here are a lot of things you'll find helpful. You go through it.
Yeah.
I don't, I think it's the same way that I was just writing and ends up with something book length. This would have been much harder if I had said, I'm going to create like a complete philosophy of something and then share it. That if I were ever to write that book, I would probably be a bit older before I'm ready to.
Well, I like what you said there with that, because when I was reading, I may have skipped to one. I may have read one chapter, and then it gave me something to really think about. Right. And then I seen another topic, in your book. Then I jumped to it, and to me, each chapter caused you to be able to think about it. Gave you take a breath, and be able to consume what you were reading. Yeah. So I really like that in your book. About how long did it take you when you started writing? I know you said you had all these essays, all these things piled up, but when you got ready to put this book together, about how long did it take you to really put the book together? And when you started doing it, did you ever want to stop and say, I can't do this?
So throughout 2023, I just wrote, and that was the fun part, to be honest, right? I'm much more interested in writing than anything else. So that took about a year, I think I took about a 2-month break in the summer, but besides that, I was just writing every single week. And then in 2024, that's when I contacted an editor and went through the actual process of making them good. Like I said, I had written them for clients, and so I hadn't written them with a wide audience in mind. And so last year was all about turning what I thought was pretty good material into actual A+ material, which was a cool challenge. I don't, usually I just write and then I'm done. I'm like, okay, good enough. Yeah. At no point did I think I was like losing hope, though. Like I said, it was such a work of passion. Really the only thing that became difficult was, what do I leave out of it? Because if it was up to me, I'd put everything in. And the editor said, "It's your first book. Like, don't make it too epic for people to read." And then he and I had a lot of good arguments about different chapters, whether or not they made sense. It was a good back and forth. He pointed things out and I would really resist. And then a week later, I'd say, "Okay, I get it." And then every once in a while, I'd be like, no. I don't care if nobody gets it but me. It's staying in like this.
Yeah, that's great. What we're going to do now, we're going to take a short break and then we'll be right back with our guest, Mr. Matthew Lowe.
Today's sponsor is Open Door Tabernacle Training Center, a church of love. They are located at 522 Wilson Avenue, Johnson City, Tennessee. You are welcome to join each Sunday at 11 a.m. For more information, you can email them at odttc1@gmail.com.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Our special guest today is Mr. Matthew Lowe. And the title is it Lloyd?
Lowe.
Right? Lowe.
L-O-W, Lowe.
Okay, Matthew Lowe. I should remember that. I used to have a supervisor named that.
Okay.
But seeing the forest and the trees. He's talking about mapping your inner world for greater clarity and satisfaction for your life. And, you were saying a minute ago how you didn't lose hope as far as, when you was writing. And myself being an author, when I started writing the chapter that I was writing in this anthology, I was like, do you want me to put that in there? Lord, I was praying, as I was writing, because I never thought I would write and or be in any type of book. And I just had to take time and say, you really think I need to tell him about this? And then God directed, yes, so he was directing the whole way to what to put in the book, because he knows what the writer, what the readers need. In the same way I see in your book, the way that you have it flowing, and then the suggestions that you gave in there. I feel that you were really led how to write it. Sometimes we think we're not, but I do believe we are. And when you was mentioned about mapping, and it made me think of mapping is like, to me, showing you the direction, and you mentioned something, know where you are. So when you have a map, first you got to know where you are, and then you could begin to map out where you want to go. And we just got finished this weekend with our, we had a conference. It was a Kingdom GPS positioning system. That's what we was dealing with. And I learned a whole lot. And then come and reading your book. And then you mentioned about knowing where you are. You have to know where you are first. You have to be willing to admit that to yourself. I am right here, but you have to look where you want to go. And when you were talking about going up to the mountain, let's talk about that mapping. How is that important, and what do you want your readers to really get from that? And just read, you ever walk by and just read a title of a book?
What's that?
And then you see the title. You walk and you're in a store and you see a book and you see the title. From seeing the title, what do you want them to begin to think, or what do you want your readers to get when they see that?
I think what you were saying, I love the conference being Kingdom GPS is fantastic, right? What I'm really hoping people see in it is this opportunity to get oriented, right? I feel like that's what you're talking about, this know where you are. And for me, I have a chapter in here called How to Be Good at Being Clueless, because I think actually the first step is being lost. Well, the first step is wandering for a while, and then at some point realizing, I have no idea where I am. Right. And I think that's very relatable for people who have gone on hikes or wandered in strange cities, or just people who are living their lives and wake up one morning, they said, how the heck did I get here? What am I doing here? Right. We have to start with feeling lost. And then the next step is to start looking around externally, internally. I think a lot of what I'm focusing on in this, which I think makes sense for a therapist, is getting oriented towards how we feel, oriented towards the story that we're telling ourselves about our lives. And similarly, sort of as you're talking about, the stories we're telling ourselves about where we're trying to go. I think people can often have a sort of vague sense of goals, or a really like big grand goal without any of the steps in between. So I'm a big proponent of, I tell my clients very often, a goal is not a plan. A goal is great. What's the plan? Right? We need to, it can be good to be oriented towards the end of it, but how the heck are you going to get there? And that's the tree element.
Wow. So as far as when you wrote the book, what particular audience do you feel really going to be blessed by this book?
I think I originally was trying to write it for like as broad as possible. I think it is for adults. I think somebody sort of past high school will probably appreciate it. It's really for anybody who is in therapy, thinking about therapy, or just wants to do this kind of work for themselves. I have the last section of the book is about how to get the most out of therapy. But I say in the book as well, you don't need to. Self-exploration, as you know, can happen in or out of therapy. There are other ways that we can look deeply into ourselves and into our lives. But I think anybody who's interested in thinking deeply about themselves and what they're going to do with that, this book would be for them.
And I noticed also you had, use guiding people, what kind of therapist to get.
Yes, absolutely. I have, as both a therapist and someone who has been a client, I have a lot of strong opinions. I've had therapists who have been wonderful and others who are really, really terrible. And a bad therapist is such a harmful thing because often they don't know they're a bad therapist. And so they get very authoritarian about it. And it goes very poorly. I want the clients to be picky. I want them to think, is this person helping me? Does this person really have my back? When they challenge me, do I feel like they understand me first, or are they simply challenging?
Great. And I notice you have all the information in your book. So for those that'll be buying your book, how can they get your book?
The simplest way is to go to Amazon, go to the link on the screen here. One thing else that's good about the title is it's definitely the only self-help book with this title. If you put Seeing the Forest and the Trees, you will either find books about forestry or my book. So that should be helpful. The subtitle tells you that it's not about forestry. That's the easiest way. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. If you search Matthew Lowe author, so people can find me there, but really Amazon's probably the simplest. Okay,
great. Well, it's getting about time for us to get ready to wrap up. This half an hour has went through so fast. What would be the last things that you may want to say to our audience concerning your book, or the importance of this is the book you want to get?
So I'll speak in some ways, because while Seeing the Forest and the Trees is a really rich metaphor, the essential message continues to be, you don't get to be simple. What I want to tell all of my listeners and my readers is we are complicated beings and life is a complicated thing. And that's a good thing, right? That's what we really need to do, is take ourselves seriously and all of our parts very seriously, and not try to say, oh, this is the good part, this is the bad part, right? We are created whole. And, everything that we're made up of, we need to understand what it does for us. Even if it's something that gets us into trouble, we also need to understand why it's, anger is a good example. Anger can get me into trouble a lot, but it's essential. It's important. It should serve me if I know how to deal with it wisely. So this book is for looking into yourself so that you can deal wisely with everything you find there.
Wow, that is so good. Well, I thank you so much for being our guest, Mr. Lowe. We really appreciate you, and I do suggest this book for people to purchase this book. So to everyone that is, this is going to be a wrap for this episode of The Exchange Show. We want to thank our special guest, Mr. Matthew Lowe, for joining us today. And remember to grab a copy of their book and invite someone to join you here in the Kin community as well. And until next time, I am Berthanna Oxendine, and I pray abundance upon each of you until I see you on another episode of The Exchange Show. God bless.
Faith and inspiration are treasures to behold. The words and wisdom whispers, guidance in the prose, faith in the stories where the heart knows. A tapestry of voices woven with care. In every episode it is a blessing to share. Welcome to the exchange where stories unfold. Faith and inspiration.